I gotta get the flag. Crap.
I don't have access to the flag.
Okay.
I'm not at home. I don't have any flags in my hotel room, unfortunately.
I found it. Found it. I think Mark is having trouble getting. I'm trying to help him.
I want to say something to Mr. Labutus here before we start.
Well, he hasn't clicked in here yet.
So, so how are we going to handle personnel if anybody wants to speak, Spence?
I mean, here comes Mark. I mean, Ryan can let them speak if they want to come in. I mean, but none of the people have that new login. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can give it out at the end of council before we switch over.
Okay, why don't you do that?
I mean, I can just do that at the end of council.
Okay. Hey, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Since we have a little issue, we can't use the same login to log in after council for committees.
Okay.
So I think we're going to X the safety committee for the rest for this evening.
Okay.
If that's okay, and I'll make that announcement sometime.
Okay.
Also, there's been a suggestion, maybe Deb Tegmeyer and Deb Dingus would like to do a meeting again, or like them to do a meeting just themselves, or if we want to do it in council again, we can.
Okay.
But there's not any way to get folks back on tonight, apparently. So
okay,
we're going to
I
try.
don't know if Deb Tegmeyer will ever want to come back after being attacked like that.
Well, you might be right.
So we have 6, just so you know, Don, there's 6 people waiting or 5 now waiting for when we get to public comments.
Okay, when we get to that, I'll try to say that. Remind me to say that again about the rest of this evening. Also, I just wanted to tell you guys, well, I can say it during miscellaneous, I probably will, but I would like to resume our council chamber meetings starting next meeting, October 5th. As long as something horrible doesn't happen between now and then, I think let's plan on being back in chambers next meeting.
Great.
I hope everybody's okay with that. Okay, here we go. Janine, are you ready?
All right.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. It's 7 p.m., actually 7:02. Janine, please call the roll.
Mr. Labutus,
present.
Mr. Lang,
Present.
Mr. Marmee,
Present.
Mr. Rath,
Here.
Mr. Barker,
Here.
Mr. Lake,
Here.
Mr. Bub,
Here.
Mr. Fennell,
Here.
Ms. Hall, Mr. Harris.
Here.
Okay, we have all present this evening. Next on the agenda, we have the invocation by Mr. Labutus.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, as we come in prayer today, we thank you for another day to serve you and to serve our city. I just ask that you be with our conversations this evening, help them to be fruitful, and bless our nation at this time as well. Just be with us this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Labutus. If you'd please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Bless the Lord, these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty, Christ the Lord. Amen.
Am I getting feedback from Spence?
Need to see if
Water.
you needed to listen to that, right?
Who's that?
Yeah.
Mark Motters was not on mute. There we go.
Okay.
Taken care of now.
Thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda, we have caucus. That's a time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything, Mr. Bub?
Yes, Mr. President, I will abstain from any voting or on ordinance 20-29. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Do we have anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the minutes of the September 8th, 2020 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Labutus, second by
Second.
Mr. Barker. Second by Mr. Barker. Please give me a thumbs up to approve. Thumbs down if you don't. Okay, those are approved. We have no appointments this evening. We have 2 reports from standing committees, one from finance and one from service. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have no reports this evening from city officials. And we have 1 communication this evening from Roger Loomis, our water administrator. Properties being sent to lien for past due water bills, and the list is in your packet. Okay. Spencer, why don't we let anybody in that would like to come in? Now is our first time for citizens' comments. Do we have anyone?
You've got 6 people coming in right now.
Okay, we'll let them get in here for a moment. And we have 1 communication this evening from Roger Loomis, our water administrator. Okay, now is our time for citizens' comments. That's a time for you to be heard. We have a few folks tonight. If you want to comment, please turn on your video and put your hand up so I can see you. Again, there's 2 times for citizens' comments, one now and one after the legislation. Is there anyone this evening? Anyone for citizens' comments this evening before we do the legislation? What do you think, Spence? Okay.
Everyone that was in the waiting room has been admitted. So if they're not speaking now.
Yeah, we're past the delay, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to ordinances on the second reading, 20-27.
Ordinance number 20-27 by Mr. Rath, an ordinance enacting amendments to Newark sewer use and sewer charges ordinance 91-59, directing limited publication of the sewer use and sewer charges ordinance.
You've heard the second reading of 20-27. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 20-27.
Motion by Mr. Rath,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 20-27? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
20-27 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-28.
ordinance number 20-28 by Mr. Fennell, an ordinance vacating a part of a 16½ foot wide alley as shown on the original plat for the city of Newark as recorded in Plat Book 2, page 4 of the Licking County Plat Records. Said alley is located east of North 4th Street and south of West Church Street.
You've heard the second reading of 20-28. What is your wish?
President,
Mr. Fennell.
I would like to make a motion to adopt 20-28.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Fennell. Second by Mr. Barker. Is there any discussion on 20-28? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-29, or I'm sorry, 20-28 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-29.
Ordinance number 20-29 by Mr. Rath, an ordinance levying special assessments for the improvement of properties in and abutting Fairway Estates subdivision and along Horns Hill Road by upgrading the existing sanitary sewer system and installing a new gravity sewer system and the necessary appurtenances thereto.
Heard the second reading of 20-29. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 20-29.
Motion by Mr. Rath,
Second.
Second.
second by Mr. Marmee. Is there any discussion on 20-29?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to amend 20-29.
Motion to amend 20-29. What's your amendment, Mr. Rath?
Mr. President, it seems we've had 18 additional properties voluntarily join the assessment. The dollar figure on this ordinance reads $206,116.50. I would like that to amend that to read a total of $292,397.40. That will account for the 18 added voluntary assessments.
So
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Marmee. So Mr. Rath, we're just amending the dollar amount.
That would be accurate, yes.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Janine, please call the roll to vote on the amendment.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Abstain.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-29 has been amended to the new dollar amount, $292,397.40. Is there any discussion on this as amended? To 20-29A, I guess, Janine. Please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Abstain.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-29A amended has passed 9-4, 1 abstention. Next, we're going to move on to ordinances on the first reading. 20 dash, oh, there are no, I'm sorry, no ordinances on the first reading. We're going to go to resolutions on the second reading, 20-60.
Resolution number 20-60 by Mr. Marmee, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 20-60. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I
Marmee?
make a motion to adopt resolution 20-60.
Motion by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 20-60? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-60 passes 10-0. And finally, we move on to resolutions on the first reading. 20-64.
Resolution number 20-64, expedite, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
20-60.
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee?
I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on resolution 20-64.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Lang. Mr. Marmee?
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a payout for an employee that we want to get them their funds as soon as possible. Plus, we have some CDBG funds from the CARES Act that we want to get rolling, so then we can get that money where it needs to go to. And then finally, we also have some refunds that we have to issue due to the TIFs. There are some refunds and we need to get those folks their money back immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Janine, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee?
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion to adopt resolution 20-64.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Any other discussion on 20-64? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-64 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 20-65.
Resolution number 20-65 by Mr. Marmee. A resolution amending R 1974, authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development a 5-year consolidated plan and a 1-year use of funds action plan, along with an application for FY 2020 Federal Community Development Block Grant Funds, CDBG, as required by 24 CFR Part 91.220 for various programs related to housing and community development and declaring an emergency.
20-65 is on its first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee?
I make a motion to adopt resolution 20-65.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 20-65?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is just basically we already passed this plan for 2020. However, because there's CARES Act dollars, we need to make the adjustments in order to incorporate those funds into our CDBG funding. So that's what this legislation is for. And that's why it's an emergency. We need to get that money working for our community.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Anyone else? Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-65 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 20-66.
Resolution number 20-66 by Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing the city of Newark, Ohio to enter into a marketing agreement with Utility Service Partners Private Label Incorporated, USP, doing business as Service Line Warranties of America, SLWA, Company, for advertisement to the city's residents of warranty plans for repairs of external water lines, external sewer lines, in-home plumbing on residential property.
20-66 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting, October 5th. Next, on the first reading, we have 20-67.
Resolution number 20-67 by Mr. Marmee, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
20-67 will be held for 2 weeks until our next meeting, October 5th. Next, we have 20-68.
Resolution number 20-68 by Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service of the City of Newark, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the rebuilding of 2 belt press dewatering systems at the wastewater treatment plant.
20-68 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. Next, we have 2 left, 20-69.
Resolution number 20-69 by Mr. Marmee, a resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor and declaring an emergency.
20-69 is on its first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
I make a motion to adopt resolution 20-69.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Any discussion on 20-69? Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-69 passes 10-0. And finally, this evening on the first reading, we have 20-70.
Resolution number 20-70 by Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing the granting of an easement over certain real property now owned by the city of Newark, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
20-70 is on its first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 20-70.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath,
Second.
second by Mr. Barker. Is there any discussion on 20-70?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
this is a piece of property that we are doing a correction on this easement that should have been done years ago. The reason for the emergency is a sale pending. And it has been a hassle to the owner through our own fault. So we're trying to accommodate them.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Anyone else? Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
20-70 passes 10-0. Next on the agenda, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Again, this is not a debate with council. This is your opportunity to be heard. And from those of you out there, I just want to tell you, we are not going to be going back to the safety committee after this meeting because the call-in is different and it's just not going to work. So if you have an opportunity to speak, now is your time. I'm going to give it a second for anybody that would like to speak to turn on your video. We're going to start with Nancy Waylo here in just a second. Hang on, Nancy. Okay, and we'll just go down the line. Nancy Waylo, give us your name and address for the record if you would.
Thank you. Nancy Waylu, 7441 Stewart Road. It's too bad that we're not going back to the safety committee. That's a little disappointing. I think a lot of people were counting on that, but I understand. I guess I would just like to ask the administration and all of you council members, if you are satisfied this evening with the report and everything that was said at the safety committee and how the $30,000 of city taxpayer dollars have been spent. We had an AI report, which was a really good report that I have also read. The Lucan consultant, Miss Sally Lucan, I assume, according to Linda Mossholder, who was on the task force, there should be something forthcoming, but we're not real sure if we'll see that or not. And we have architectural plans for the Evans Foundation building, but only a select few people have seen those plans, and I'm not sure now if you'll all get to see them either. And no one really answered my question if the task force is done. I think a few people asked that question, if everything's wrapped up. So those are just some of the comments and questions. I'm all for a low barrier shelter. I think we need one. Obviously, I was here 2 weeks ago talking about the 3 men who had passed away on the east side that maybe could have benefited from a low barrier shelter. We'll never know because they're not here to speak about it. And so I would just ask if you think you got your money's worth. There's some fiscal conservatives on this committee, and I'd just like to know your thoughts if you'd ever like to publicly say them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith? Mrs. Smith?
Hi, thank you. Rochelle Volan Smith, 237 Violet Court. I also wanted to comment on the service sort of thing. It was nice to hear what we did, but there's a lot of unanswered questions. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. On resolution number 65, I'm hoping there's a little bit more transparency with that issue, that the public is going to be aware of, and that there's going to be disclosure on how this is being directed. And also, I was wondering in resolution number 66, what the name of the actual company, what they're related to, and who is benefiting by that. I'm wondering whether there's a conflict of interest.
That it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If there's anyone else who would like to speak, please unmute yourself and bring up your video and put your hand up. Mr. Schaefer, would you like to speak?
No, sir. I'm just with the, I'm an intern with the think tank, so I'm just basically observing it and stuff.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Your last chance. Do we have any city officials this evening? Our Honorable Law Director, Sassen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Thank you, Director Sassen. Mayor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Ellington. Just quickly, and I'm looking off the side here to the legislation. 65 is CDBG type standard process as we go through with 1 year and 5 year plans, and they always need to have public hearings. So I'm not going to go long on that, but they're always, we have to seek and want to seek public input on that. So that's a standard procedure. There's nothing closed. If nothing, that's as open as anything. 66, normally what happens, and that was brought forward by the utility department, water department a little bit. Many times we can repair lines and pipes clear up to a connect. And then when you get on private property, that's up to the homeowners. So there's a potential here where they could buy some, if for all the words, insurance that could help cover them on that. And it's a company that we've looked at and thinks good. There's no requirements. There's nothing. But again, if they have to tear up the front yard and fix their service line, that doesn't come under the cost of the taxpayers. So it'd be a service that could help them with that. And then lastly, I think really, and Nancy said it, I don't think the process is nearly over with the homelessness. I mean, obviously, it isn't as simple as just a report. It's where's it go from here? And I think we've always talked, we don't want to surely get something rolling. There is one cost to build out a facility, and then there's a cost to operate a facility. And that can get quite hefty. And what we want to be certain, what does the city stand behind it? Well, we come up with $30,000 and we're the largest partner in at least the beginning of this process. We certainly had a couple people that attended Columbus too. But if you go to Columbus facilities, you'll see a who's who list of supporting companies over in Franklin County because of just the sheer number of them that contribute to all kinds of issues and help with people that do not have permanent shelters. So we're a little more challenged here. And I think what we don't want to do is get a facility rolling and then have to close it down in a couple of years because it can't be self-supporting. So there's an amazing amount of groundwork and research. Do we want it to stop? No, but it flips into a different phase of implementation now. So I think up to this point, it's been good consulting and really at the end of the day, we're happy up to this point, but if it stopped here, we wouldn't be happy. It's got to keep going. So with that, we'll continue the dialogue, but I want to thank everyone for their input tonight. And with that, I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Labutus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to thank everyone for their input this evening during Safety Committee. And with that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus. Mr. Lang.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Nancy, appreciate your comments. And I don't think I can answer everything, but I do recall back in June when we had the last discussion on the task force, there was a request for an accounting of the funds that had been collected. And that accounting showed there was still about half of the money that was deposited was still, or about 37,000, I think was still there. So I think the task force work is still ongoing. And from the city's perspective, I think we've gotten our money's worth so far. I think, Jeremy certainly pointed to a number of interesting points from the report, and there's quite a bit of information in there that I think will help us moving forward. I would like to see, and I was hoping to get have a little bit more discussion on that last question I had at Safety Committee to Dingus around how do we get some of those those large employers to help us with some funding sources for operating a low barrier shelter or some of the other things that we need to do here in the community. So I'm interested to see where the task force goes from here, and hopefully we come up with the right infrastructure to start bringing some of that money, like the mayor was saying, that you see in Franklin County, bring it out here to Newark. So with that, I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Mr. Marmee.
Hey, Mr. President, I need to call a finance committee meeting. Just to answer a couple of questions. As far as Nancy's question, are we satisfied with the report and the spending of our funds? Well, we're not finished yet. I guess the next thing is execution. Let's see how those entities that have indicated that they are on board, and are they going to execute? And then in addition, I think it was Jeremy that brought up the whole thing about collaboration and how will they work together. So that's probably where the rubber meets the road, and if we're going to get our money's worth, that's where it's going to happen. The best plans unexecuted are just paper, is all they are. So we'll see how it gets executed. As far as 2065, yeah, the CDBG funds, I'll echo what the mayor had to say. Those definitely, it's completely transparent. CDBG is for low income, and that money is being spent in accordance with all the guidelines of the CDBG. And as the mayor indicated, there are all kinds of open forums as far as what goes on with that. As far as 2066, there is a company, the name of it escapes me. I mean, it says Service Line Warranties of America. They are working in conjunction with another company, and I have it in my notes in another location. But this is not insurance. I did do some research. It is not insurance. It is a service agreement. Therefore, it does not fall under the guidance of the Department of Insurance. That's why there are some differences as far as being able to them dictating who does the repairs and things like that. So I did talk to one of the representatives of the company, and she indicated that to me. So it's just one of those avenues. It's trying to get education out to the citizens as far as a way to help them if something does go wrong with the water lines. Like the mayor said, the city's only responsible to the tap. From the tap to the house is up to the homeowner or the property owner. Inside the house, usually your homeowner's insurance protects it. And then the other thing is there are some homeowners insurance companies that are offering some protection for that line in between. So just want to get that information out to the public so that it gives folks an opportunity to possibly purchase something that could benefit them so they wouldn't have to come up with that large amount of money. And with that, Mr. President, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Marmon. Mr. Rath.
Thank you, Mr. President. First off, I'm very excited to call a service committee meeting in council chambers on Monday, October 5th. That would be exciting to actually get back to meeting live and in person. Just wanted to say thank you for all the paving that's been going on. I haven't been in Newark, but I have had people tell me that about some of the paving that's going on. Very excited about that, especially East Greer that hasn't been paved in a very long time. And definitely, especially 35th, South 35th, coming straight out of the hospital and Scheid, connecting 35th to 30th. Both of those roads were in really, really bad shape and utilized extensively. So I'm excited to finally have those paved. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Barker, that's very close to a Clemson shirt. You know that, right?
Yes, Mr. President, I do.
Thank you.
I was not thinking about that when I changed from my business attire earlier today. But thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Chief Baum. There was some incidences over on Bryce Street for a business owner who had a significant amount of equipment stolen, as well as the muffler cut out from his own vehicle. So Chief Baum and I had a discussion and talked with patrol, and they really stepped up, and that business owner is very thankful. Just doesn't have a muffler on his truck anymore. I'd also like to thank Director Rhodes for some work he did last week. And with that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. President. I first want to say thank you to Director Rhodes. Probably over the last 2 months when we first had our committee discussion regarding the status of the homelessness efforts in our city, Ever since then, every call that I've received regarding homelessness, I've included David on that. And so we've been on this journey together, dealing with private property owners having concerns with the homelessness. A church had concerns with homelessness. Right now, the Veterans Park and the Buckingham House and the museums have called requesting some guidance in dealing with the homelessness. And so in what we see tonight with the number of people that were on the call, this discussion and this issue is most definitely in the forefront of many people's minds and wanting to find some type of resolution. I for one, I think that the AI report is very thorough. I mean, it's, I don't know how many of you have gone through that, but it's a very good document. I think it does recommend some different avenues for a public entity to coordinate efforts. And I think that, you know, it goes through, and I think it was very fair about talking about the strengths and weaknesses of our current environment. You know, we have multiple agencies that provide different types of services, and while all are good and doing their things in their silos, it does say that there is need for improvement and coordination and wanting to bring all those different services together so that we can have a better system here in Newark and Licking County. And so I just want to very first say that I hope that whatever entity, and it sounds like the Dan DeLauder situation is going to be a private group. So that doesn't seem to be, it's not going to have the same type of requirements and when it needing to be publicly reported and sunshine laws and things. So I would advocate for anything that's going to be completed or improved, that we eventually have some type of public entity over the efforts in dealing with not just a shelter, but all of the services dealing with homelessness and housing in our community, because the report also talks about affordable housing and some other initiatives. So it doesn't just talk about a shelter. There's some other things in there. Secondly, I do want to reflect on the Lucan letter that was sent to all of us as council members. It was a 2-page document. And during the safety committee meeting, Deb Tegmeyer did mention that, you know, Lucan Solutions wasn't able to complete the 6-step training that she wanted to, that she was going to do it over a virtual, but that never happened because some miscoordination amongst the task force members. But the third item was where she was hired to have a, you know, a part of her contract was to hopefully have a shelter in place by December of this year. And that does sadden me, because that means that we're not going to have additional spaces for people to go this winter. And so, you know, tomorrow is officially fall. And as the seasons change and people are out in our streets, and in my case, as I reported to this council a few committees ago, you know, I get calls about people living along the river, and they're there, and we know they're there. And, you know, it's just very concerning that now the work of that piece of her contract is not going to be completed. So that does concern me. And I am concerned about that we spent that much money and the contract wasn't completed. But I'm hopeful. I mean, I was on that initial field trip when we went to Columbus and Cincinnati and toured those facilities. And the mayor's right. You know, when we went to Columbus, the Community Shelter Board is a public entity. They operate under sunshine law, and they do have several different partners involved with that. And hopefully we can come together and bring a solution to this. Not complete solution, because it's going to be ongoing just because our community is growing and these urban issues are coming to our community. But hopefully we can work together to continue to discuss this. And I hope that the safety committee reconvenes at some point, because there were a lot of people on that call tonight. And I know Celia Kendall wanted to speak. Her hand was risen at the end. I'm sure others wanted to speak. So hopefully at some point, since we can't reconvene now, hopefully we do reconvene sometime in the future so others can publicly discuss this issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bub.
Thank you. I need to call personnel committee meeting for 2 weeks. And just a reminder, we will have personnel committee after this council, about 5 to 10 minutes after. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Mr. Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank everybody who is working on this task force. It is wonderful to see so much energy surrounding this important issue. To answer Nancy's question directly, I am personally satisfied with the AI report. I haven't made it all the way through, Jeremy, but I'm working on it. So it's very long, but very thorough. And I do appreciate the attention to detail that I have read so far. I will admit that I am still conflicted and concerned about the Lucan letter and Sally Lucan no longer being a part of this process. I felt like her expertise would have been a really wonderful thing to have here. And I do think that we need to make sure that we not only have all of these incredible community partners, but an expert in the field of implementing and running a low barrier shelter, just to make sure that we actually have the expert. I feel like Sally was that expert. And so I would like to kind of see where that might go and who we might bring on to help guide us from here moving forward. I too think that just by the number of people that came to our committee, that it would warrant perhaps another meeting of some kind to let people digest some of the information that they've had. And I just want to make sure that everybody has all of their opinions voiced and that they feel heard. I think that's a really important part of what we do here. And I appreciate everybody sharing all of the information. And, you know, thank you to Deb Tegmeyer. I know that was not an easy thing. And I appreciate her coming and presenting. Of course, you know, Dan DeLauder, thank you so much for, you know, what you're doing to help move this forward. I just, you know, hope that we can continue to involve the United Way and government entities just to make sure that we have those systems of transparency and accountability built in. I do think that's an important part of running a low barrier shelter. And with that, I will yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fennell. I ended up starting reading it a little too late last night and ended up going to sleep. So I'm only about halfway through also. So Ms. Hall.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank Deb Tegmeyer as well and everyone who brought information to us. I had a long conversation with Margarita, who was the manager at Washington Square. And, you know, we talked about concerns and safety concerns with the shelter that would be there on East Main. I'm sure that will be taken into consideration, but nobody spoke to COVID this evening, and we're not over it. And if that's a low barrier location, then that has to be taken into consideration, I believe, anyone coming in. You know, it could be a mom with 2 kids, and who knows who's going to be staying there, and they need to be safe. That's, I mean, that's part of the whole issue. So Police Chief Baum and I had a long conversation about the safety around Washington Square and Save-A-Lot and up and down East Main Street. They're trying to keep an eye, a better eye. Street Department had to clean up some things that they did. So there's a lot of things to cover, I believe, and I want to continue the conversations. I hope we do. So I thank those for tonight, and I thank Chief Baum for his input. I mean, we had a nice long conversation about safety. The 2 people that passed away, one wasn't overdosed, and the other was actually a brain aneurysm. So I just want to kind of clear that up. And with that, I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. And Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Mr. Raff said, it's good to see all the paving going around in the city. And kudos to the mayor and administration last year for putting them extra gas tax dollars and capital improvements to get a lot more streets paved. So I'm sure we all appreciate that. With that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Labutus, I'm going to leave it up to you if you want to have another safety committee, if you want to reach out to Deb Tegmeyer and Deb Dingus and see if they want to have a continuing meeting sometime or have their own meeting or whatever. So I'm going to leave that in your hands, if you would, please. Again, our Spencer, thank you again for this evening. I was thinking about this. Is there any reason we can't just stay on this site for a little bit until Mr. Bubba's ready and continue and go with personnel? Can't hear you.
It helps if I unmute myself. We
Thank
can
you.
stay here if you want. Yes, I didn't
Would you-
think of that.
Mr. Bubba, would that be okay?
Yep.
Okay. Why don't we do that? It might be, if I'd have thought of that before, we could have possibly done the other meeting, but never mind now.
Would you have to stop the recording and restart it
Right.
to separate it on the YouTube channel?
Yeah, we'll adjourn council. I'll stop the YouTube and then I'll restart it again.
So everybody stay on or?
Yes, everyone stay on.
Okay. Okay.
I'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Again, we're going to go back live to our regular meeting, October 5th, unless there's some catastrophe between now and then. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Labutus, second by Mr. Bub. All those in favor signify by thumbs up. And hopefully this will be our last Zoom meeting. So thanks, everyone. We sure appreciate it. Do not leave the meeting, correct?
Correct. Do not leave the meeting.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.